So, Sam, summer's coming up. I know that aquatic activities are a lot of fun for us to do, but my special boats that I have rented for June, I already invited a couple of friends, so that's a shame. It's a full boat. Thanks for playing.
Nicely done. Very
Thank
good.
you.
I wasn't expecting that one.
Always keeping you guessing with its introductions. Welcome to the latest edition of the Two Fish at the Table Poker Podcast. I'm one of your hosts, Legendary Bet on Poker Stars.
And I am your other host, East Coast Sam. Welcome to the Daylight Savings Time edition. It's actually bright out this time, so you can see both of our wonderful faces. But I'm really excited for this one. 2014, again, wasn't a year that I watched live, so I was sort of coming into this new for the first time. But there was one compilation of clips that I did manage to see. So I'm excited to finally see these clips in full context. So I'm excited for this one.
You know, this is a very interesting main event because this is probably the biggest subtle shift in the production of the main event.
Yeah.
The last couple of main events, after they kind of settled into this lot more live vibe style of episodic main event, this was really their first attempt at making some major changes at both a micro and a macro level in the actual nature of the broadcast. Now, 2013 did mix up a few things subtly compared to the very one level here, one level there nature of 2011 and 2012, but a lot of changes, and a lot of these changes I actually think were for the better. I think a lot of small things and medium-sized things. I mean, it's still poker. I mean, I'm not suggesting the entire content is drastically different, but the changes they made, I'm very pleased with.
Yeah, I mean, I like some of the new segments. We'll go into this in more detail. I really like the sort of first-timers segment that they kept doing, sort of weaving in and out. The Side Action Championship was terrific. I loved all that. Sort of a bit of a return to the nuts. Again, we'll lay that out in more details. Yeah, and just the graphic design of, the graphics that they show on screen, the little bumpers they do leading into the commercial breaks, which show, a montage of, different photographs through the tournament. I really like a lot of that. There's a couple things that I do have an issue with, but they've definitely smoothed out their editing style. They know what to do with Kara Scott. They know when to put her into an episode. So I think it works very well.
I know it's interesting because we were both pretty down on 2013 as a whole. I think we both agreed it was one of our least favorite seasons of the main event. And a lot of the changes, I have to wonder if maybe ESPN and Morgan Skandari's production company, I wonder if maybe we weren't alone in our critiques of that main event, and maybe that was responsible for shifting the focus. This main event was actually a little bit larger than the 2013 main event, 6,683 players. And the biggest sort of headlining detail of this main event was $10 million even for first place. And honestly, it's interesting that they did that because I guess, 10 million is, that's that big 8-digit payout. It wasn't the biggest main event first prize of ever, and it wasn't even the biggest first prize of the World Series that summer.
Right, yeah.
Prior to this main event, there was the second edition of the Big One for One Drop, which, unlike 2012, doesn't quite have as much relevance to this particular main event. Although I do wonder if perhaps one of the reasons why they cut the episode count for this main event, besides the flow and maybe improvements, was because they dedicated 6 episodes to the One Drop. And if you combine the 6 with the 16 episodes of this main event, you get 22, which is still in that ballpark, in that mid to low to mid 20s episodes, which that had kind of been the unwritten standard for the last couple of years. But besides that first prize, the main event tournament structure itself was, for the most part, the same as past years.
Yeah, I mean, next year, 2015, was the one where they had all the final tablists make $1 million. So that obviously brought the payouts down a little bit. But it is interesting that this
was
also
one where the payout pool was expanded from 10% to 15%.
Right. Yeah, so I mean, it is interesting that this one year they decide for whatever reason to go to $10 million, and then the next year, first place drops to something like 7.6, which of course is still a large amount of money, but you have to be Joe McKeon saying, "Where's my extra 2.4 million?"
Exactly.
Yeah.
And so this main event, again, 3 day ones, 2 hour levels. 30K starting stack. Again, the same stuff that we've come to grow and love. And yeah, again, you mentioned the first timers being a recurring bit along with the side action championship. Those were, for the most part, really the main two segments of each episode. They weren't in every episode, but the majority of them will have one or the other at the very least. Other small changes was, again, some of the branding and the advertising tie-ins. We had Gentleman Jack with the Gentleman Jack right move of the night. The DraftKings.com King of the Night, which would pretty much just be they'd pick one player that maybe won a couple of big hands or was, for the most part, one of the major focuses of that episode and gave him that award, even though it doesn't really mean anything, unlike, say, the Player of the Year award. And also, the biggest change, something that I totally forgot in retrospect, is they completely abolished Table 2.
Right, yeah.
Table 2 is gone. Now, they still had the RFID set up for at least a couple of tables. It's not exactly clear from the editing how that would have worked. And oftentimes, one outer table is kind of shown to be the main outer table that might spend an extended amount of time in the outer table side of the episode. But sometimes there was one or two tables that would kind of bounce back and forth for that power. And that changes a lot of things about these episodes that we'll go into as we cover it bit by bit. But again, a drastic change, not one that would be permanent. They would return to a 2 and even 3 featured table structure later on. But this, of course, Main Event was testing that style out.
Yeah, I mean, I really prefer the 3-table format. Having, 27 highlighted players gives you plenty of opportunities to see big names or also see amateurs like, for instance, Georgiana Lim, who was doing very well in their tournament, and you can sort of highlight them. I think it's an odd choice just for 1 year just to see what it's like to not have a secondary table or not exactly call it a secondary table or give it as much focus. I just don't really think it works for me.
Now, I have to wonder if part of that was because, I did feel that some of the Table 2 content was pretty weak in 2013. So you have to wonder how much of this is responsible from the quality of the content in the previous main events, or also maybe the logistics of how they were working the tournament, or maybe players were complaining about being on a TV table and they wanted to decrease how many players were on that. But when you're going to just show that the cards anyway at the other table, much like Table 2 would have gotten anyway the year prior, you have to wonder, did it really make much of a difference, especially considering that there was not a live feed of this main event from point A to point Z. So we'll never know unless, producer wants to talk to us about it, because, it's a very, I think, important point of this 2014 main event. But, hey, it is what it is. Other things that were kind of kept the same but slightly tweaked was the same music, the Best Day of My Life song, was kept, but the actual introduction was shortened.
Right.
I don't know. I mean, a lot of the same images and people are shown. They added Ryan Reese into the introduction as well, but it's, maybe like 45% shorter than the introduction in 2013.
Yeah, it happens very quickly, yeah.
And also, this is already told, I noticed from episode 1 onward, the cinematography of some of the outer table coverage, especially in the first couple episodes, is a little bit different. The frame rate looks different. The lighting is a bit different. Maybe the camera that was actually used was different. I wasn't against it. I just thought it was interesting that was in effect in the episode.
Yeah, me too. Yeah, I mean, it is interesting, in my opinion, the cinematography choices they do for the first timer segments, how it seems to be more handheld, sort of right in the player's face as they're sort of talking about their day, which I think adds sort of a nice personal touch, sort of brings you into the space with the first timers they're talking about their journey. So I thought that was actually something impressive in the technical aspects. I don't normally notice that with this sort of stuff. So it's sort of nice to see that they're sort of thinking a little bit more about that.
I agree. And then another new bit was the player tracker, which would be after some hand, particularly in the later parts of the main events, they would show a player's chip stack, how it fell in the rankings of the whole tournament before the hand and then after a big win. Not really a fan of it. I don't really think it really accomplished much. I mean, you didn't have to go to the trouble of showing this whole animation. He's now in 4th. Oh, okay. I mean, we're going to, considering that they regularly show the end of episode leaderboard chip counts anyway, it just didn't really make much sense, especially since those are usually pretty late in the episode anyway. So it wasn't like, minute 10 of a 45-minute episode, player tracker, and then 35 minutes later, okay, fine. Now we'll see what's changed since the player tracker. It just didn't make sense to me.
Yeah, I mean, they're obviously trying to hype up the sort of big swings in poker. Often one of the common things about No Limit Hold'em is that, in one hand, you can go from being chip leader to being bust, or you can be a bust out to being chip leader or something. Obviously, they're trying to highlight that with the graphic. I think it's okay. I think it's acceptable. I would have liked to have seen maybe the graphic in the other direction. They always show the player winning. I think Norm even makes a joke about it at some point, like, how come we never see the graphic go left to right, which I thought was funny. But yeah, I think it's fine. I didn't have a problem with it.
And then, again, a small detail, at the start of each episode is kind of a brief, like, poker chip animation with a little image in it of, like, kind of a recap of the last episode, or, kind of like a previously on segment. And I thought that was okay. I mean, it's pretty quick. And granted, I do feel that my biggest complaint of the editing and broadcast choices is too many flashbacks in this main event. So that kind of tips the scale into the excessive, especially when you're dealing with episodes that were typically aired in blocks of 2 at a time over the course of 8 weeks for the duration of 16 episodes. But
yeah, I don't mind the recap at the beginning because, as you mentioned, it was very quick. It's only like 2 or 3 sentences, and then it's on into the intro, and then it's on to the actual episode itself. But I totally agree with you with the flashbacks. There's like 5 flashbacks to Curtis Rystadt in this thing, especially toward the back half after he leaves and Keranen continues his run. There's flashbacks to previous years in the coverage, which is fine every now and again. Like Lee Force from 2006 comes back. It makes sense to give a flashback to him. Even though I don't actually think they give him a flashback, which is interesting. But anyway, it's okay to do that every now and again. But I feel like, yeah, they do it like once an episode, even twice an episode.
Yeah. So as we said before, we'll be covering the first half of this season of episodes. That's episode 1 through 8, which takes us from day 4. So we almost forgot to mention that this main event begins on day 4 instead of day 3. Which I have mixed feelings of, because there might be some really great content we could have seen on day 3, and but at least episode 1 is also the bubble episode, so we at least kind of get when the tournament gets real, and we get kind of a repeat of 2013 in that Phil Ivey is the headliner of Table 1, and Ronnie Barta and Mark Newhouse are among some of the players on the outer tables spotlighted. Mm-hmm. And also Kyle Keranen is with Phil Ivey at the featured table in this episode. And even though I don't really believe that this main event has one main character throughout the whole thing, I think Keranen is absolutely the main character of the first half.
Yes, I'm with you.
So it's a pretty good pairing that we get somebody like Ivey, who, again, still considered one of the best poker players of all time, still active on the high stakes circuit and everything. And Kyle Keranen, both with a lot of chips too. So it's not like they're just there as like a cameo or a token appearance. They're both there to make an impact on the action on the featured table. However, I really have some pretty negative thoughts on this episode. Even though it's a bubble episode, even though that's normally one of my favorite components of the main event, I didn't feel this episode was particularly memorable.
Well, there's a couple things I feel this episode does right. We get plenty of time to hear about Ronnie Barta. Ronnie Barta was going for his 5th consecutive main event cash. So that's a pretty big achievement that was being hyped up in the poker world at the time. We get, a good sense of who he is as a person, not so much as a player, because he was short stacked. He didn't really get a lot of hands. We hear this, interesting interview where he's talking about growing up in Brockton and how he would go to funerals of people who had died because they were like involved in crime and stuff. I thought that was sort of a compelling interview. Also, just seeing him double up and seeing just how emotional he was. Like, I thought that was a really real human moment there. Yeah, I mean, a couple of the hands were interesting. It was nice to see, Dan Smith popped up, his storyline becoming important later on. Martin Jacobson also popped up very briefly during one of the montages. So they're sort of setting these people up decently so that we can see their stories later on. But in general, yeah, I mean, I'm with you. It's not a super compelling episode, with maybe the biggest hand, most interesting hand being Newhouse getting quads against the guy's queens full on the bubble. Like, just so sick.
It's pretty big, and again, this is one of the hands that kind of shows that different editing or cinematography that we mentioned earlier, where the whole look of that hand is just slightly different. It must be a different camera or something. And I like it because it's a big moment. And it just kind of sits all confidently, turns over the cards, and the guy makes the call. It's a pretty boss moment. And again, this episode here, I think there are a few like micro details and micro moments I really like. Like there's this guy Freeman who has one chip and then this big bag of ruffles when he's sitting down as the tournament short stack all in on the first hand against Newhouse. That's just pretty funny to me.
Yeah.
Ivy has a very minimalistic check motion where he kind of has his hands like this and does that. Kind of funny. I mean, Ivy is pretty smooth sailing from this episode. I mean, he loses a hand towards the end, but he has a lot of chips, and none of the hands are really super crazy cool or awesome or anything. It's just kind of standard Ivy poker. He plays solid. So again, we had our first taste of the new timers segments where a lot of them are mentioning their backgrounds, where they're from, and we kind of see a few of them will last a very long time. Some will last kind of a medium, a long time. So they dwindle down how many interviewed people they will go through. It's kind of a nice progression when you compare segment to segment going forward.
Right.
There's a very brief montage of days 1 through 3, which I kind of liked because it's nice to acknowledge that those days in the tournament exist, because when we get on day 4, it's obviously way past the starting point. But again, it was a weak episode. It kind of got me worried that I was going to be down in 2014, but luckily things turn around pretty solidly with the next episode 2, the second part of day 4, with just over 500 players left, so well into the money by this point. Ivy gets a brand new table, and some of the people at his table, it is ridiculous who is there. We have guys like Stevenson and Politano who will make the final table. That's pretty wild. We have Curtis Rystadt and kind of his prelude to the real action. Kane Callis, well-known pro and across a couple different facets, and also Jeff Madsen.
Right.
Who has kind of popped in and out every now and then, dating back to 06 in this main event. So a pretty great table that unfortunately will get broken partway in as Ivy continues to chip down. And this episode might be one of the most odd episodes we've ever seen, because it felt like they were changing who the showrunner or the director was. It's episode like every 10 minutes, the whole focus of the episode completely changed on a dime.
Yeah.
And I kind of like it. It kind of makes this sort of bizarre variety pack kind of episode, because it goes from Ivy to a pretty brutal, not brutal, but kind of swift and uneventful bust out. And then it goes to Maria Ho and Jeff Platt at the picture table for one hand each. And then all of a sudden it goes all the way to this guy. They map a grandpa with 1 million chips, and he burns through it off screen and then burns the rest of it on screen. And then, I mean, it's just a bizarre episode. It also has Barda bust. I mean, I don't know. I'm not sure what your takeaway was, but it was just really bizarre.
Yeah, I mean, I'm with you. I mean, Barda, we mentioned how the main character of the first half is Keranen, and I agree with that characterization. But if you just went off of the first, episode and the first 10 minutes of this episode, you think that Barda was going to win the tournament. I mean, he gets so much attention. The bust out hand, they give the full, full Monty for it. It takes a minute to get through. The river is, genuinely you feel it when Barda busts out. And, he goes to Phil Ivey and he's stay in there. And then Ivey says, I plan on it. So you get sort of another moment after he busts out, which is normally not the case. Yeah, I mean, it's a very sort of interesting hodgepodge of moments, and they're all entertaining. And then along the way, we get Politano doubling up for the first time, and we get a sort of sense of who he is as a player. He's up on his feet, and he's so nervous. He's snapping his fingers. He's talking to himself. He doubles up through Ivy, of all people, too. Yeah, I mean, it's interesting that we get all these little introductions and character moments throughout. Jeff Platt doesn't really have that much to do. Even though he does double up, but he's not a super presence in it. It is interesting to see him pop up. Yeah, I mean, it's just a very, odd sort of hodgepodge of hands, almost like a grab bag of different experiences, different stories. At least everybody gets, little moments. So, we get a little bit more about Politano. We get a little bit more about Larabe and others. But it is just sort of interesting, that they went with this sort of grab bag style.
I just can't get over how this guy Map, who, as Norm says, Grandpa's got 1 million chips. He chips way up, and then in less than one level, he blows through all of it. A lot of it, and his actual Map's table was equally as insane as Ivy's original table, because you had Tonking, Jacobson, Margolin, Haugen, and Placey, all who will be either crowned the king or final table or whatever throughout the whole WSOP Main Event. They're all at the same table, so I guess it's not surprising that the amateur map lost all those chips. But man, just fold to day 5, man. I mean, come on.
I mean, with King 10 of diamonds, he shoved into what was it, a 4-bet? I mean, come on.
I mean, it's an episode that burns through like 3 levels of day 4, so it's a rushed episode, and I guess I wonder if this is a product of just the spreading out the episode main event into just 16 episodes versus say 20 plus, and I wonder if maybe we would have gotten a little bit more of Maria Ho or Jeff Platt at the featured table if we had more time for that sort of day 4 to breathe. But as is, especially considering how weak the first episode was, it was a refreshing, bizarre. We got a little bit of Newhouse in there too. We got, it's like the one of those appetizer platters from a Chinese restaurant. You get a little taste of everything, even though it's kind of gross. You're still happy after you eat it. So
yeah, Griffin Benger also pops up.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, a lot of different people who we're going to see later on or in other years just popping up in here. Again, I like it because we get a little bit of everybody, but
And so episode 3 takes us to the first of 4 parts for day 5. And oddly enough, they actually skip an entire level of day 5 because I guess they really wanted to get right to the meat and potatoes of day 5. And I can't blame them because with 291 players left, we get a table 1 that has perhaps the biggest, best, craziest, longest, most epic, and most narratively satisfying poker fight of all time.
I remember you sent me a Facebook message after you watched the first episode. You said, I don't know, Sam. I mean, I'm not really feeling on it. And I wrote back, Curtis Rystadt is coming. And he comes in his full – we mentioned that he appears in the last episode, but he comes in his full glory right in this episode. I mean, right off the bat, we see him in a hand with Jack 5 against Ace King, and he like shows his cards. It's like Jackson 5, say it with some soul. Like right off the bat, he just comes in, and they just they do such a good job just establishing this tension. You see a bunch of clips with Curtis, and they don't really talk about Kyle. And then, Kyle just starts getting in these little comments. Like he says to somebody at the table, this guy is obsessed with baseball hats. We talk about baseball hats for 30 minutes. And just little by little, they build this up until boom. And it's so satisfying.
So the actual fight doesn't really start until about halfway into the episode, which is good because it allows us as the audience to really see Rystadt's talky nature during other players' hands, seeing the bizarre cards he's playing and his sort of riffing like improvisations off of the cards. Some pretty pleasant banter with his tailmates, pronouncing Stewart properly with like a European accent. And then all of a sudden, Kyle can't stay quiet any longer, which is funny because he began the episode with 3 million chips, super big short chip stack, and he was chipping up to almost 4 million. So really in a solid chip stack as the day 5 was midway at this point. And you have to wonder, because Keranen was playing very well. He was bullying the table using his chip stack very effectively. And he made a couple of hands here and there, but he was also getting the best hand to fold a fair amount. And Keranen, it kind of reminds me a bit of the Matusow Khan back and forth in 05 because you kind of had one much louder, talkative player and another guy maybe not getting as much in edgewise, even though the ratio of talk was fairly even at various spots. And it's comedy, it's entertaining, and it leads to some fantastic poker situations going forward.
Yeah, I mean, it's just the lines that come out of him, Rystadt going, now that we've got your opinion, the only thing I'm lacking is your chips. Just the little lines he gets, calling him Clyde, which just made me laugh so hard every time. It's just perfect, just passive aggressive comedy. If this was in a screenplay, you'd be like, this is just perfect. It's just so much fun.
It's an amazing table 1 action, and oddly enough, possibly one of the most entertaining hands of the table 1 action doesn't even involve Keranen at all. It involves a crazy 3-way pot with Stewart, Rystadt, and Margolin, where Margolin hits his magic bullet 1 outer on the river and gets paid off for a full double up plus some Rystadt chips in there. And it kind of feeds in. You can kind of sense that the energy of the table was feeding into that hand because Rystadt was kind of mixing it up, playing some goofy hands, some crazy cards, but he played that hand pretty well, actually, all things considered, with 3 queens against a full house and a straight.
Yeah.
And, it does outshine the episode. The outer tables is definitely less memorable in many ways. We see another example of possibly the worst Hollywood of the 2014 main event with Kuntz, with making quads and being one of our first timers. It definitely shows in hoping her opponent will raise her when she bets. But again, table 1, it's one of my favorite blocks of featured table content of all time. It's just fantastic.
Yeah, I mean, the aces versus queen forehand is just legendary. I mean, just Rystadt hitting 2 pair and then hitting a boat on the turn, and just everything he says, any pot blind I'm going to call. It's just such a good line. But, when I was watching the compilation of clips, I thought Keranen, came off as I thought he, just said like a couple little things here and there. What this episode does a good job showing is that there is a back and forth between the two. And also that Rystadt is really just playing around. He's just sort of trying to have fun. There's a couple opportunities where he sort of de-escalates the situation a little bit, like, hey, Kyle, I'm just, messing around a bit. He doesn't really say anything that's like mean. Like, he doesn't call Kyle an idiot or anything. Like, when he says stuff like, blind, I'm going to call, I'm going to stack you gone. That's not mean per se. That's just sort of trash talk, I'm coming at you sort of thing. So, all things considered, like, I think this is, really enjoyable stuff. I was reading sort of comments about it where people are like complaining about Rystadt, saying he's the worst player to be at your table. I want there to be more talk in the game, but I don't want it to be like this. Like, I don't have any problem with this. He's clearly having a good time. The other players at the table are having a good time. They get in a lot of jokes as well. One of them asked, like, are we all having dinner together? Like, I really like this. This was really good.
Absolutely. It's again a main highlight of this main event, and it feeds in very well into the next episode, because this is the sort of second or almost third act of this multi-act, more than 3-act play, because Keranen begins the episode under 3 million chips again, after taking a fairly sizable chunk, but not a unrecoverable chunk loss to Rystadt, and he again just goes back to work and just pounds away at his table, often at the expense of Timur Margolin, who's just a little too sticky for his own good. And Rystadt at one point actually shown kind of shaking his head as he sees Keranen gain back the chips that Rystadt was just barely able to get back from him. And again, the talk continues, even though the tempers definitely start to cool off, because we're talking 2-hour levels here, and so the action here takes place over 2 more levels after the previous events was in the 8K, 16K level phase of the tournament. So slowly the table dynamic shifts a little bit, especially as new players join the table, and then Rystadt has to inform them of the day's events thus far. You weren't here when I had it, were you?
And they talk about golf at one point, and they, kind of sort of make an arrangement that they'll like play golf against each other, and whoever wins has to gets paid into the main event by the other guy. So they're definitely getting a little more collegial, definitely still a little bit of tension in the air, but yeah, I mean, it's still just enjoyable. And
the tension for the most part does diffuse with a great line where, as another guy starts to get into the conversation, Kyle jumps in, "You don't know what you're getting yourself into, sir." And then everyone laughs, including Rystadt, and they kind of like fist bump. They're like, "Yeah, I see, Kyle. That's it. Everything's fine." And again, the shift actually just kind of goes back to normal Rystadt banter, making raises of how many yellow chips, the 1K chips and stuff, like how big a bet really is. Is it smaller? Is it bigger? Based on how many chips or what the value of the chips are. So again, dumb stuff like that.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah. And as the tape, again, I love the table 1 action. I don't think the outer table stuff is particularly memorable. We lose guys like David Einhorn, who, we know from 2006, that infamous blow up at the final day of the tournament. And again, Newhouse and Maria Ho, Politano being the chip leader, 5 million chips. He'd won a big set over set situation in the previous episode to become the chip leader. So again, we saw Politano briefly in day 4 action, so it's good to see the chip leader kind of be someone that we do technically know.
Yep. And we get a segment from Dan Smith about how he was initially like a chess prodigy when he was a kid and he transitioned to poker. Sort of nice to hear a little bit more about him. He has an interesting table dynamic too. They comment on him a couple times that he seems, maybe a little snippy sometimes. Sometimes he has like sort of a couple comments to say to other people. Not as bad as Rystadt, but it is sort of interesting to see how they build his personality through time. And it's an interesting sort of segment to think about how chess compares to poker or not. And it's actually, he's like the fifth player that we've talked about that has made the transition from chess to poker, which is interesting.
Yeah, it's funny how it's often the same couple of games, chess, like video games, or some things that you can kind of see the connection, but others is a little bit of a reach. And again, Dan Smith is kind of given in my book, the moniker of the highlighted outer table.
Yeah.
And that's usually apparent when it's often that they show back-to-back hands from that same table. Sometimes even in real time, it was back-to-back hands sometimes too. And we didn't mention the first part, but the Side Action Championship, the first part was in episode 2 with the poker shuffleboard where Matusow crushes it in one shot. And again, these bits, they're not poker related per se, but it's often funny to see 4 idiots, and in this case being JRB, Matusow, Hamilton Locke, often, poking fun at each other, doing all these kind of silly poker adjacent games, mocking each other for being just awful at a game or messing up or blowing it or something like that. Again, it's just fun. It's kind of that, group mentality, joke. It's a bunch of friends fooling around, having fun, making dumb bets and stuff. So it's some fun stuff. And I think these first couple of games are emblematic of that dynamic.
Yeah, I mean, it's these 4 guys just have so much personality. So if you just let them talk, they'll talk and they'll just be friendly with each other. Norm gets to play sort of game show host dressed up in a tie. For whatever reason, they have like Lon sitting like off in like the stands or something, which I thought was a weird thing to do. But he gets in a couple lines. Yeah, I mean, these segments are just great. They're to the point. They don't waste too much time. And, they're sort of a fun return to what the nuts were. But there's more of a focus to it because it's an actual competition. So that's nice.
we had a similar kind of side action bit with Negreanu and a couple other, I think Lindgren and a couple of guys a couple main events ago, and that had one of the funniest moments of main event history with that football to the face. So
yeah, Billy Gates.
Kind of that in that same Billy Gates, in that same vein, kind of did some goofy fun. And again, it's pretty quick. It's maybe 2 minutes or so per episode. It's an 8-part sequence, so they cover a different variety of games. And so again, it's pretty harmless fun that worked for me compared to a lot of those mediocre nuts segments.
Yeah.
The only real outer table action that I really thought was funny was this hand between Aoki and Eddie Sabat, where Sabat just has a pretty funny face when he makes an awful call on the river. His face is just kind of frozen like that. That's kind of funny, and it will kind of get a sequel moment in a later episode where he kind of flips the script on her. But again, table 1, definitely the major focuser. And unfortunately, this table will be moved to the outer tables. It will be kind of the main outer table for the rest of day 5. But we get a brand new refresh of the feature table for episode 5, day 5, part 3, with just 139 players left.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, it's an interesting transition. Obviously Rystadt and Keranen are still together. We're still going to get a lot of good footage from them. But yeah, I mean, it is kind of nice. I mean, when you have one table that takes up so much of the focus, you do have other players in the tournament. You have other characters like Dan Smith. So while, we do lose a little bit of the footage from Keranen and Rystadt, it is sort of nice that they changed it a little bit so we get a sense of who the other players are. And we got some good stuff. Going into the 3rd episode, we get more from Griffin Benger. We get Matt Waxman making a very unusual basketball bet, He wants to go through the casino and take a bet on whether people think he's a better basketball player than average, not actually play basketball, whether or not people think he's a better player, which I thought was interesting. He's an interesting character, more for Maria Ho and stuff. So yeah, I mean, it's nice that we get sort of a transition back to a more traditional episode, I think.
Well, yeah, because this episode, the table 1 has a boatload of chips at it. Like we had 2 players in the top 10 and a couple of stacks that, even though they weren't quite top 10, they were still very healthy. Dan Smith, Matt Waxman, King Callis joins in a little bit late with, again, a lot of chips. And this is at the 12K, 24K portion of the tournament. So this is still before they colored up the 1K chips. So you just have these mountains of chips.
Right.
These chip oceans. And honestly, I feel like episode 5 is kind of a Griffin Benger character episode, and it does not come off well really at all, because I think his table talk is pretty weak sauce. He chips down pretty much the whole episode, so he goes from third in chips, loses like million plus 2 million chips in just this episode alone. And I don't know, he just did not come across all that impressive to me.
Yeah, I mean, I would say there's a difference between he doesn't come off as impressive, but I feel like we had a good sense of who he is as a person. He's sort of an interesting character. We will get to 2016. Get to 2016. We'll talk about that later. I'm just talking about this for now. Yeah, I mean, he's an interesting character, and I do agree with him that, it doesn't come off as too impressive on the felt. They keep hyping him up as being impressive on the felt, but he doesn't really show it that well. He does, okay every now and again. But.
I mean, he wins one hand, I think, in like the 7 hands he's shown in this whole main event, or on the figure table, I mean. He won a big hand on an outer table in an earlier episode. And he and Matt Waxman try to do this sort of riff on the Best Day of My Life, like poker-style song, like, I got ace king, whoa, I have aces, whoa, please don't have ace king. It's just the weirdest thing. This would have been the first main event after they had used that song in the last main event, so and they will change what song they'll use in a later main event, but it was just bizarre. It was like, it reminds me of when I don't know the lyrics to a song, I just make up stuff off the top of my head to the tune, and it was very strange.
It's like an intro we would make for this podcast.
basically. And the other outer table, besides the replaced table 1 from before of Rystadt and Keranen, is this table that has Maria Ho, Martin Jacobson, Brian Roberts, who I know from the show 2 Months, 2 Million from G4 TV that I was trying to get you to watch a while ago. So it's kind of cool to see that guy pop up in the main event. There's a pretty bizarre hand with 5 pocket pairs involved pre-flop, 2 of them being both pocket 10s, and sadly those 10s end up all in against 2 jacks. That was kind of a mathematical weird moment to watch unfold. And there's a great line by Norm where he's like, I guess he's not going to tell me his other 10s because out of courtesy for him. It's like, I don't know, I would probably tell him, right? I mean, what's the harm?
Because give him some hope. What, so that he can go and pack his bag a second earlier? I mean, that's the only real courtesy you're providing. I don't know.
Yeah. I mean, it's a pretty solid episode. I wouldn't call it, as fun as the Rystadt, Karen and stuff. But again, when you have that many chips at a table, and the chips do go flying, there's a crazy hand between Roberto and Benger where they each put in 1 million chips each with Jack and Ace high respectively. That would baffle most people if this was a heads-up match. That would be a pretty wild heads-up match if they were willing to play that crazily with Ace high and Jack high.
Yeah, it is crazy. Yeah, I mean, I enjoyed this episode. We got the side action championship segment being chip riffling, which I know that I would do terribly on. Matusow makes $500 because JRB is just so bad at riffling chips. Yeah, I mean, it's a fun episode. Again, get sort of like a little bit of everything. No sort of final tablists get like big moments in this episode or anything, but everybody else gets some good moments.
Mm-hmm. Quite a few mini interviews in this episode as well. Where they'll have like 10 to 15 seconds where they'll say a sentence or two about the main event, or in some players' cases comparing this main event to a previous one or something like that. Small stuff, nothing too distracting.
Yeah, I mean, Roberto says it's just another tournament. He just like disavows the main event, which is interesting. That's the other thing.
Yeah. But episode 6, after a string of episodes where I felt that table 1 was by far the best part of the episode, this kind of flips the script for me, because I think that table 2, or the outer tables, is by far the best content, maybe the best outer table content of the main event up until this point.
I'm with you.
So there's really kind of 2 major components to this episode. The first being the continued play of Rystadt and Keranen, and the second one being Mark Newhouse kind of finally being in the spotlight, because he, for the most part in this main event, had been, referred pretty much every episode, maybe a hand or two shown, but we kind of see him chip up off screen for the most part. We don't get to see how his play style is, compared to 2013, kind of hard to tell. but seeing him in action. And so we finally get that sort of reintroduction to him in this episode.
Yeah, I mean, there's a segment right toward the start of the episode where he's talking about how he lives in LA and he's trying to go under the radar, and they cut in different clips of Norm saying, if he makes the final table again, I will climb the Eiffel Tower in flip flops and all that. Yeah, I mean, I think we've talked about this before, but Newhouse just seems like a super chill dude at the table. He just seems, and he keeps talking in the interviews about how comfortable he is. He definitely comes off as that, makes bets very quickly, makes snap calls. Not at the same time, he's not too distant. He's willing to kind of smile and joke a little bit, sort of make faces if he makes a bad call or not. Yeah, I mean, he comes off fairly well, I think, throughout this entire episode, making a lot of hands with, 9-4, he makes 2 pair, which is just crazy, all sorts of stuff. But, he's catching cards and he's playing well, and he starts to finally come into focus, which is nice.
And he mentions at episode's end that he had so many chips that he could just pretty much raise every hand and they couldn't do anything about it. And that's pretty true. He plays a lot of, good, these king queens or 6-6 or 9-4 or whatever, or ace jack. He gets some hands and he plays them strongly, and it works out more than it doesn't. He becomes the chip leader in this episode. And even when he runs bad, he runs good.
Right.
He raises a guy of kings pre-flop and makes a full house with the ace jack, even though it loses. So it's pretty wild to ride for Newhouse, and he still ends the episode in the chip lead.
Yeah.
But really, this episode kind of has a unifying factor in that it involves 2 players seeking redemption for a deep run in the main event after they had been the chip leader deep in a past main event. So that's Keranen and Newhouse. So again, it's fun to watch Newhouse, run hot and wearing shades, as Norm refers to. But the Rystadt Keranen storyline reaches its epic conclusion. Firstly, Keranen gets a pretty good line in with the phrase "one good turn that deserves another" after he turns 2 pair to best Rystad's pair at episode start, and then a lengthy, amazing, crazy, epic hand, not the same magnitude of the aces queen forehand earlier on day 5.
Yep. So Keranen has ace 10, Rystadt has king 4. The flop comes out to give Keranen the nuts, and Rystadt just has top pair, turn bricks, and the river gives Keranen a 2 pair.
Rystadt 2 pair.
Gives Rystadt 2 pair, excuse me. And I mean, it's they really let this play out. They give plenty of time for Norm to offer his remarks. He says that he's going to try to take all of Kyle's chips or die trying, which is very apt. And just the cinematography and everything, Rystadt's tried to keep it together, as he pushes out his river bet. And, he's sort of got his head tilted like this, riffling with his chips. And Kyle just goes all in, and he just Rystadt just lifts his head up, turns, like he's clearly surprised and shocked about it. Like it's just such an effective moment how it builds up. And then, he calls, and that's about it. Rystadt.
Well, it's a lengthy decision process. Rystadt talks it out loud. He puts Keranen on ace king with 1 club, which would have given him nut flush draw on the flop. It's a pretty, I can respect his thought process. Obviously he's wrong. He had one of the 2 cards down to the suit and the type right, which again, you don't often see when somebody is reading someone's hand. Oftentimes they just stick to the card value, not the suit. So that's, again, right, something that you don't often see. It's a tough spot, but the thing is that Rystadt's trying to win. He mentions in his exit interview, he's going for the win. And so you can fold and have over 1 million chips left, which is okay. He's trying, survival or whatever. There's 100 players left. But if he's right, he makes the call and he's right, he's going to have like 4 million plus or something like that.
Right.
And that would be equivalent of over 100 big blinds, which is really, especially at the end of the day, you can go into day 6, healthy in chips, and you can really play your game. And so it's one of those tough spots. I don't know. If he really thought, I wonder if it was kind of a blocker bet on the river. Mm-hmm. And so I think if that was Rystadt's mentality, if you're gonna make a blocker bet and then not know what to do when you get raised, I say you should probably just check the river, because I don't think Keranen puts him all in if he checks. He might, but he probably puts out a smaller bet, maybe like 700,000 or something like that. And then at least Rystadt can call it and not be gone, and still get a hefty pot in the process.
Yeah, I mean, I'm with you. I think that's a good read on the situation. Yeah, I would have
Of
just
course,
checked.
of course, he called a 3x raise from the big one of King 4, so maybe you don't do that either.
Exactly. Yeah.
But considering how when day 5 began, we had that amazing epic aces queen 4 hand, just the whole story, the whole narrative of this day 5 just worked out so beautifully, and it's not often we get to watch every step of the way a plot like this play out, which is all the more impressive considering we had fewer episodes to watch this main event with to begin with.
Right. Yeah. I mean, this just, this is just sort of one in a million that just sort of the luck plays out like this. Granted, there is a perhaps better storyline for 2014. We'll have to get to the final table to show the real awesome storyline of this year. But yeah, I mean, this is a great storyline and it worked well. Both of the guys took it well. Kyle, after the fact, is saying, we were at each other's throats. He made my life hard, but he was just messing around. I'm glad he's gone. So props to both of them for doing well. It's unfortunate that Rystadt, this is the only time we see of him. I think he's actually retired from poker. I think he retired from poker in 2016 or something. I read he's like a real estate developer or something, so he's doing that. So, good for him. I just wish we'd seen more of him at some other tournament.
It's a shame, but again, we kind of, as we are dividing the main event in half, we kind of have the Keranen and Rystadt half. Newhouse is kind of the main story of the second half, but all the way through we kind of have this first timers subplot.
Right. Yeah.
And that continues as day 5 ends because we get Billy Pappas, a foosball champion from Lowell, Massachusetts, which is basically our neighbor at this point.
Mm-hmm.
Tom Serra Jr., Dong Gua, and Marcia Kuntz.
Mm-hmm.
Kuntz does bust as day 5 ends, but we still are left with multiple of our first timers. And again, they are regularly featured in these small first timers bits. And the 3 major ones do survive into day 6 as we hit episode 7 with 79 players left. 1 lady left, and unfortunately this lady's in last place, and that's Maria Ho. We get her at our featured table at the very start of day 6 in last place. And then after Ho unfortunately busts, not the first one out on day 6 actually,
Mm-hmm.
but one of the first couple busts. We get a brand new table 1 with our new headliner, Mark Newhouse, Vitaly Lunkin, who kind of doesn't get much spotlight really. We get Matthew Haugen, who took many of Map's chips on day 4. And then one of my favorite characters of this main event is Mr. Bill Cole.
Yep, he's sort of the folksy amateur of the group. There's the sort of in the mold of Darvin Moon, has an interesting segment about being a bail bonds guy and how he had to use a stun. He only used a stun gun once. And he's just such a folksy guy. The hand with Newhouse, I mean, it's just awesome.
There's a great table dynamic between Bill Cole and Mark Newhouse. Newhouse just kind of shrugs off Bill Cole's, celebrations and just kind of being happy whenever he wins a hand or is in the lead. And Newhouse, again, was chip leader when day 6 began. He definitely chips down, kind of being loosey-goosey with his chips. But that's kind of his style, so I guess it's hard to blame him for that. And we get to see, again, this is kind of continuing off of the last episode, more of Newhouse's poker style, raising a lot of hands, not being afraid to go for it. And he had mentioned how he was feeling calm and relaxed when he had chips, so he really could play his game and not feel that pressure that, oftentimes a lot of these poker players, they'll say once they make that repeat return to the deep run in the main event, they feel, a fraction of the stress and pressure that they did the first time. Keranen mentions that he was better. Newhouse mentions that it's a pretty common occurrence. So I guess the lesson is if you're stressed, it's okay. Just do it again and it'll be fine the next time.
Yeah, I mean, these guys are professionals, so, it's their job to try and decrease the stress. It is interesting that that's a consistent thread. We haven't mentioned Devonshire, who is making his second main event run in, I think, 3 years. And yeah, I mean, he's sort of weaving in and out of the coverage as well. And we sort of hear from his perspective. It's interesting that we get, in this year, multiple guys who are making their second big run, as well as a mixture of people who are just playing the main event for the first time. That seems to be sort of the 2 stories we're shifting back and forth between, which is interesting on a narrative level.
One of the more amusing details I found was this episode's side action championship. I bet I could beat all 4 of them in chip stacking. I just think riffing off of my chip stacking prowess in Las Vegas this past fall, I just feel like I would wreck them. I would take the gold in that event no matter what. I think
I would take last, period. I have no fine motor skills. I would not be able to do that. Yeah.
Well, that'd be a shame. But on the outer tables, as you know, I enjoyed the getting away from the whole Cole Newhouse stuff. We get a good taste of kind of the character of Dan Smith as he takes, as you know, Politano and Smith have different takes on Leifer's Hollywood tank in a set versus set situation, where is a very great edit with Politano. The instant Leifer says all in, it cuts immediately to Politano like the snap calling by putting in a whole stack of chips in his hand. And I just always found that edit cut very amusing. And Leifer, busts, and then Politano talks to Dan Smith like, I like to respect the game, and if he has an ace queen and a king queen, it's a tough decision. And Dan Smith's like, well, I could see him. I know he wasn't thinking about it. He was just Hollywooding. And he's like, I respect the game. I respect poker. And you kind of see some of that not snarky, but kind of snooty Dan Smith table talk that we will, see in the next couple of episodes.
Yeah, I mean, it's not overly mean, but he's definitely a little blunt. Yeah.
Yeah. And Scott Mahan, another first-timer who maybe had been featured a little bit less than the other ones up until this point, kind of gets a couple of big wins, and we see him start to kind of get into the swing of things.
Mm-hmm.
Kind of at that main outer table I mentioned that we kind of, again, not super exact when I say the main outer table, but he's in there with a couple of guys. Matt Waxman, Keranen's there, Luis Velador in there, and the king of the night being Cole. It's so sad, but Cole just kind of goes a little too ambitious. Kind of reminds me of Yiming Fang in a bit. He kind of busts in a similar part of the tournament, where he doesn't necessarily make the wrong decisions to go with these big plays, but considering the caliber of his opponents, maybe keeping pots smaller will allow you to succeed better.
Absolutely.
And so with episode 7's end, we left with just 57 players. Blinds really picking up as they hit the 30-60K barrier. And the last episode of the first half of the main event, episode 8, the second half part of day 8, we get a refreshed table 1 with Brian Roberts, Aaron Kaiser, Vitaly Lunkin, Zaichenko, Will Tonkin gets in there, and there's some pretty good stuff on the outer tables if you ask me in this episode.
Yeah, I'm with you. Yeah, I mean the first table, it's okay, but the outer table stuff definitely is where the action starts to pick up. We get sort of a little bit sense of how each of these players are going to become important later on play. We get Van Hoof shoving with King Jack.
Jordan Van Hoof.
Jordan Van Hoof, excuse me, not Van Hoof. Shoving with King Jack of all hands into Ace 5 with Waxman. We get all sorts of different, little hands here and there. One thing that we didn't really mention is how many hands are shown post-flop or post-turn, which I thought was just sort of an interesting editing decision. Didn't you notice that? I mean, I thought there were like a lot of hands they were showing post-flop or post-turn on the outer tables, which sort of cuts the action down a little bit. We don't really understand how it happened pre-flop or after the flop, but it does, definitely get the action going. It is weird when they call hands, the right move of the night when we've only seen half a hand. I think that's a little bit of an odd choice.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's a little strange. There's some of the Matt Waxman's kind of my favorite, spotlighted person in this episode because he goes all in mid-meal, rushes at mid-meal, and then per norm that means he's ruining his meal even as he doubles up. And he ends up having this sort of salty reaction to Eddie Sabat after he celebrates when he wins a big three-way all-in. And he actually tweets on his phone. We saw Greg Merson tweet on his phone a little bit in past main events, and Waxman salty at Eddie Sabat for celebrating far more than Waxman, I guess, thinks is appropriate, which brought me back to the whole 08 Horse Championship where Dee McKelvey was criticized by the naughty poker pros at the time for his antics at the table.
Yeah, I mean, and Dee McKelvey's actions are just nothing in comparison to, jumping up out of your chair and throwing high fives and, hooting and hollering, which is interesting. Yeah.
Devonshire, who, had a healthy stack for up until this point in the tournament, we see him make a crazy but successful 6-4 bluff against pocket jacks. And again, I missed a rafting joke by Lon of all things. It's kind of funny. And Keranen again bluffing off aces, something bluff with aces, and again some good stuff. Some solid play. And Don Gua's got heart. That's all I can say about him.
Absolutely, Don Gua's got heart.
And so again, I think there's some solid poker play in episode. Nothing viral, nothing at the level of the day 5. But again, some solid stuff, especially as we're getting from 57 players down to 44. It's really becoming real to these players how close they are to the finish line. Even if they're a middling stack, you really have a legit chance of making it to the end if you're still alive by this point in the tournament.
Yeah, and I mean, if you look at the chip stacks, Jacobson is top dog with 10.9 million. Sindelar is second with 10.3. Keranen's in the mix. Lorabe, Politano, Newhouse. So a lot of players who we see eventually make the end are actually doing fairly well at this point, which is interesting.
Yeah. I mean, I just like seeing Roberts in this episode because I know him from the show 2 Months, 2 Million. That was an old G4 show about 13 years ago where 4 internet players would try to make $2 million playing online poker in a 2-month span. He was one of 4 on that team. So again, that was he's in a little bit older by 2014 at this point. Yeah. But again, he's definitely kind of a cocky, arrogant youngster, but he still is clearly finding some success in the live side of things despite being a online focused player originally. So.
Yeah, I don't think I saw that show.
I believe on YouTube the entire show is in one big video.
Oh, okay.
I think it kind of worked. I'm surprised they only got 1 season. I won't spoil the ending of the show for anybody who hasn't seen it, but I thought it was pretty good. Kind of a small little show that I think poker pros could appreciate. A lot of players cameo in it that we've talked about, or pop up as rivals, or just kind of in the poker party life. A party might look, it's Lucky Chewy, or there's someone like that. So again, it's, I recommend it.
Yeah, sure. We could watch it. I could watch it, and then we could maybe talk about it or something.
We could, yeah, that'd be a good idea. Yeah. And so again, the first half of 2014, I think it's a pretty solid roster of episodes besides maybe episode 1. I would take pretty much all these episodes over 2013, really. I think, besides the Morgenstern meltdown stuff, you take that away, I think this is a much better main event. Some of the changes obviously worked out, if you ask me, but we'll have to see how those play out as we hit the back half next time.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's a strong start to the season. We get a good, sense of not necessarily everyone's personalities who are going to make deep runs, but we get, little glimpses of Jacobson. We get plenty of Politano personality, mainly through the clock conversation. We're starting to get, these guys' personalities who are running deep. And of course, you get plenty from Newhouse and Keranen, and all their stuff is enjoyable. So yeah, I think that they've done a good job thus far setting up these people and setting up who they are as players and people. So it's very nice.
Yeah. And that, I guess, we can dovetail into our collective thoughts on our little poker book club moment here, because we have both now independently read Mike Matusow's book, Check Raising the Devil. And it's funny because you actually gifted this book to me for Christmas, and I, took my time, I read through it, and then I offered you to read it, and then you read through it in like a couple of days flat. It was very, very impressive.
Yeah, I read through the whole book in, I think, 3 or 4 hours, I'd say, spread over a couple days. It's, I think it's 270 or so pages. 270 so pages, including a glossary in the back. I mean, yeah, it's a very quick read. Obviously, both of us are very familiar with Mike Matusow already. We grew up during the poker boom, so we sort of know a lot of the events. But also the writing style is very to the point. Sort of very clinical, not too much sort of introspection in terms of Mike Matusow's personality, which benefits the book in that it moves through the events very quickly, not too much time is wasted. But the downside is that it doesn't seem too interesting to me. Mikey has such an interesting voice. You listen to his podcast, he has such an interesting personality and perspective on things, even when you disagree with him. I would have liked to have had a voice in his book that's a little bit more introspective, has a little bit more humor and personality to it. maybe slows down at some moments and really just sort of lays out details. My favorite parts of the book were the moments where he did slow down. Like he talks about, him going to prison and how he, prepared for that in advance by trying to play different tournaments and make money for it. And then obviously him in jail, him describing that was very interesting. He talks about the Poker Player Championship, which he won in 2005, won $1 million off of that. And he really slows down and talks about that tournament and developments that occurred. Those moments are good. Everything else just happens so quickly that I don't feel like I have a strong sense beside the basic outline of his life, who he is as a person.
So the book kind of begins with him growing up, and then it gets into his dipping his toes into the poker world, and then getting more and more deep into it, and then eventually sliding to drug use, the party, drug, and then the best part of the book for me is the portion that covers him getting into drugs, and then how his sort of entrapment situation with this undercover cop that was befriending him. The detail, I'm taking this all at face value, assuming everything he said is the truth and not like a biased view. It's actually, I think it's a pretty interesting story. He does, interspersed amongst that part of the story, go into a lot of the main event events that we've talked about on past podcasts. 04 versus Raymer, 05, both his final table at the main event and also at the Tournament of Champions. And so I appreciated that, and obviously is when he lists like the hands that he had, and like I had ace 5 here. I was like, oh, I remember that from there. So that was kind of a fun little refresher on that. It was, for the most part, we don't learn a ton more than I could already have assumed or seen on those episodes of the main events. But again, it's funny. I'm a big fan of Breaking Bad and Better Call Saul, so I would say the meth side of the story was kind of amusing. I don't know. I felt like Matt, if what was on the page was 100% factual and actual, then I do feel that Matusow was wronged legally. The thing is, I don't think that's 100% true. I think that that's probably 70 to 80% of the reality of the full situation, because but to be fair, he regardless of why he did it or how he did it, he still did something illegal. And so even if they're kind of creating crime from a do no wrong and no wrong will come to you mentality, he's in the wrong. But again, I enjoy I don't read a ton of biopics like this, or themed biopics, so it was a refreshing sort of thing for a player that I have a nostalgic sort of feelings for, as far as seeing him on TV, watching him evolve from this guy in 04 to the guy he is now on his podcast in 2022. So
yeah, they're definitely trying to sell this story as sort of a story of redemption, that he starts down in the depths of, initially living in a trailer park, which he apparently claims he lived in a trailer park for several years, even as his poker career sort of took off. But then, he's living the fast life, he's hanging out with strippers and he's shooting drugs and so on. His claim about the undercover cop is that he gets clean with the help of this guy who thinks is a good friend. And then his friend just starts texting him over and over again, can you hook me up with drugs? Can you hook me up with drugs? Eventually he just gives in. And he gets, arrested for that. And then there's this bizarre scene where he's about to go in for, I think, sentencing or something. And the cop comes up to him in the hallway and he's like, don't worry, Mikey, I got your back. I'm going to put in a good word for you. And then goes into the courtroom and says, like, Mikey is the worst person ever. He's so bad. He did this, which, like, it could happen. But it just feels like something out of like a bad movie or something, more so than it feels like real life. When Mikey tells this story in interviews and stuff, he usually summarizes it as, I sold drugs to a friend and I got busted. But he repeatedly says over and over again, I'm innocent. I didn't actually do this. So, I can't find the court transcripts. I tried previously to find court documents. I couldn't find anything. Again, who knows how honest he truly is in all this. He claims toward the beginning he changed some of the people's names around. The names of his girlfriends weren't actually his girlfriends' names. There's also 2 with credits in it from Amy Castelry and Tim LaValle, which usually indicates that the book is ghostwritten or they've collaborated with him in some way. So who knows how much of this is his book and how much of it is these guys' books. Maybe that just explains why the voice is a little flatter than it is in most autobiographies. Yeah, I mean, who knows how truthful it is? Who knows how honest it is? And it also, the whole idea of, here he is redeeming himself kind of falls short given what we know has happened in his life after 2008. The book ends with his 2008 main event run and the power of positive thinking, which he hyped up then, which we talked about earlier on the podcast. I would have liked to have, seen again, obviously, what happens afterward. He has another book coming out, Poker, Pain, and Politics, How All Three Changed My Life or whatever. So maybe he talks a little bit more about how he sort of changed away from that redemptive path. Yeah, I mean, it's an interesting sort of account, even if not too super well written.
I mean, I liked it more than Deal Me In, which was kind of a repetitive, like 20 sections about 20 different players. At least this one kind of had a full story. And, if you remove the thoughts of is this real or is this exaggerated or whatever, I think I enjoyed it at that sort of basic book level, fairly fine. So, I've only read 2 poker books in my life. This is the second one, of course. So that's not saying a ton, I guess. But again, I was happy to get a chance to read it. And since we've discussed Matusow at length in this podcast, I think it definitely helps inform as we've seen Matusow in just the Side Action Championship here. And he's clearly, comes across as a happy guy, goofing around, having fun, playing some goofy poker games, shuffleboard, chip riffling, dealing cards. So again, it was fine.
Yeah, I mean, it's the $16 is the cover price for it. My recommendation would be try to get a used copy that's a little cheaper, or maybe go to the library and get a free copy. I'd say it's like a 3 out of 5, B- sort of book. I'm reading, other biographies right now from people who, are professional writers. Mikey clearly isn't a professional writer. But yeah, I mean, it's definitely enjoyable. It's not very demanding. We didn't mention that Phil Hellmuth wrote the foreword to this book, where basically just says, like, you can't put this book down. It's so cool. Not really much there. If you know about Mike Matusow's life story and you're sort of interested in learning a little bit more, I'd recommend it. But if you're not too familiar with Mike Matusow, you have just like a very casual, cursory interest in poker, I don't think I would recommend it. But yeah, I mean, try to find sort of a cheaper copy of it. And, just try to read it on a weekend or something where you don't have much else to do.
I mean, if I return to Vegas this summer, I'm going to bring the book with me, try to get a autograph. That'd be pretty cool. That might be a fun little moment there. But yeah, I'm happy to discuss the book with you. And I think that kind of wraps up our agenda for this episode of the podcast. Thank you for listening, everybody. If you have any comments, questions, requests, etc., let us know. We are on Reddit. We're on Facebook. We're on YouTube. Obviously, comments, subscribe, all that jazz. We're happy to hear your input. And anything you want to close out with?
Yeah, let us know if you'd like how we do the formatting for this. Ben and I actually discussed, maybe doing the entire season in one episode here before we decided to bring in, Check Raising the Devil. Let us know if this is something that you like, if you want us to, focus in particular on any one or two things. As we mentioned before, if you're at all involved in the production of these episodes or you're in the background of an episode or whatever, let us know what your thoughts are. We're very interested in the production process and the changes from year to year. And we'll probably have the next episode out, pretty soon, like well within like 2 weeks. I mean, I've already watched through most of the second half, so I just sort of need to watch, I think, the last couple episodes of day 7 and then the final table, and then I'll be all ready.
Yeah, and then we're on to bigger and better things with the 2015 main event.
Right.
Train will just keep on rolling. I'm in talks with hopefully getting some special guests in later podcast episodes. Fingers crossed. You never know if you're listening. Give us a chance here. We'll treat you like royalty for an hour and a half, and talk about some great poker. But until then, guys, enjoy your poker, enjoy your TV, enjoy your poker TV, and we'll see you next time.
Yep. Take care, y'all.